that are on the screen behind me. In the event of the fire alarm going, please leave by one of the 3 emergency exits, and we meet across the road under the canopy outside Waitrose. No plans for any practice fire alarms this evening. Can also ask everyone to switch their mobile phones off, and I'll just introduce the committee in front of me right now. Lewis Jones on the far right there from our legal department, Peter Cleveland, Head of Development Control, Rebecca Clark, the Senior Planning Officer who will present this evening, Kat Pearson, Senior Planning Officer, Elizabeth Sims, Head of Planning. And with that, can we now move on to the main business, please? Apologies for absence, Emma.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillors Michael Goodridge, David Else, Dennis Lee, Stuart Stennett, Chris Story, Stephen Mulliner, Mike Band and John Ward. And we have substitutes, Councillors Patricia Ellis, Andrew Bolton, Christian Hesse and Bob Upton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest prior to the meeting?
None prior to the meeting.
Any others? No. Thank you very much. Questions from members of the public, Emma?
None received.
Item 4, application for planning permission. We've all been on an extensive site visit more than once. Item B1, WA 2017-0120, 141 to 162 Oxford Ridge, Godalming, GU72NL. And the officer to introduce this application, Rebecca Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The site is located to the north-east of Oxford Ridge and the central recreation ground. The site comprises 22 dwellings, which are served by 2 cul-de-sacs. The site is referred to as Site A within the wider proposed redevelopment of Oxford Ridge, and the surrounding area is residential in character. The aerial photo on screen shows the residential nature of the site and its relationship with existing neighbouring residential properties. The images on screen show the application sites. The top 2 photographs show the existing dwellings served by the northern cul-de-sac, and then the bottom 2 photographs show the dwellings in the southern cul-de-sac. And then the central recreation ground is shown on the photograph on screen. So full planning permission is sought for the erection of 37 dwellings following the demolition of the existing 22 dwellings. All of the proposed dwellings would be affordable and would be developed, owned and managed by Waverley Borough Council. The site would benefit from 2 access points, which would be connected by an internal road running through the site, and a total of 83 parking spaces would be provided. This would include a mixture of spaces within the individual plots as well as spaces outside the plots. All of the parking spaces would be allocated. The density of the site would be 38 dwellings per hectare. It would represent an increase over the existing density of 23 dwellings per hectare. However, officers feel that it would not be out of keeping with the surrounding residential development, which has a density of 30 dwellings per hectare or greater. The dwellings would comprise a mixture of 1, 2, 3 and 4 bed properties. The proposed mix has been designed to meet local needs following consultation with existing residents. All of the units would be 2-storey in height, and the designs would feature a mixture of dormer windows, porch canopies, front gables and flat roof projections to the rear. The materials would include facing brickwork, render, black weatherboarding, UPVC guttering and plain roof tiles. The dwellings would benefit from private rear gardens, and these would be made secure through the use of close-board fencing. They would be set at a maximum height of 1.8 metres. Areas of soft landscaping within the site would include low hedging along the front garden areas and planting alongside pathways within the site. Areas of hard landscaping would include permeable paving for the proposed parking spaces and coloured tarmac for the proposed pavements. Bin storage would be provided within the private gardens. There is a telephone line within the site. The existing telegraph pole would be relocated. Existing properties which are serviced by this telephone line, which wouldn't be demolished, would retain their service. Services to the proposed dwellings, subject of the scheme, are expected to be provided within underground ducts to each property, and this has taken place within other sites of the wider redevelopment of Oxford Ridge. So taking members to the proposed elevations, there's going to be a series of about 4 or 5 slides now which show the different housing types and materials. The front elevations are shown on the top and then the rear on the bottom. So if I just take you through some of these, you'll see the mixture of front gables, porch canopies, flat roof elements to the rear, as well as the mixture of the different materials. This slide shows an illustrative perspective drawing of the proposed dwellings and their relationship with the neighbouring residential dwellings. The top elevation shows the proposed dwellings which would front Oxford Ridge. The elevation below shows the proposed dwellings which would be set back from the main road within the site. And then the bottom 2 show the proposed dwellings in the context of existing neighbouring dwellings. As previously mentioned, the site is known as Site A and forms part of a wider redevelopment scheme. The site was previously granted outline permission under a hybrid application in 2014, and the previous application included 4 sites, which are seen on screen, sites A, B, C and D. The illustrative layout which was put forward for the previous outline permission could be seen on the left-hand side and compared to the current scheme on the right-hand side. The current proposal seeks full planning permission as opposed to the previous outline permission, and there would be an increase of 3 dwellings as part of the current proposal compared with the outline. There are also differences with regards to the housing mix and layout, albeit the 2014 scheme was illustrative only as it was outlined. Moving to the determinant issues, the site is located within the developed area of Godalming, and the principle of residential development is considered to be acceptable. The proposal would provide for affordable housing, which will contribute to meeting local needs, and would replace older housing stock with a high quality new buildings. Officers consider this to be a significant benefit. The size, height, scale, bulk, mass and design of the dwellings is considered to be acceptable, and they would integrate well with existing residential properties. Having assessed the impact to neighbouring residential amenity, officers are satisfied that there would be no resultant material harm. Sufficient parking space would be provided, and there would be no resultant harm to highway safety. If I could turn members' attention to the update sheet. Following an initial response from the county archaeologist, which recommended a planning condition be imposed, the applicant submitted additional archaeological information. No further comments have been received from the county archaeologist in relation to this additional information. However, officers consider that the additional information could be submitted as part of a condition discharge should permission be granted. It is therefore not necessary to receive any further comments from the county archaeologist prior to the determination of the application. Members will see that additional comments have been received from the Council's Environmental Health Officer in relation to air quality. These comments recommend the removal of a condition which was originally recommended to secure the provision of electric vehicle charging points. So in light of the comments received, officers recommend that condition 22, which is set out on page 55, be removed, and then the remaining conditions be renumbered. The revised recommendation of officers is therefore subject to conditions 1 to 21, as set out on pages 47 to 55 of the agenda report, conditions 22 to 27 as set out on the update sheet, and informatives 1 to 21 as set out on pages 58 to 62 of the agenda report, that permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And members, it's over to you. There's no public speaking, and I think Councillor Bolton wants to come in first.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to first thank officers for useful ongoing discussions on the housing developments on Oxford Ridge. Council housing at Oxford Ridge was first built 80 years ago, partly to house workers building the Guildford-Godalming bypass. At the time, people regarded these houses as wonderful, and they were a significant improvement on existing housing, especially where people had come from London slums. However, the houses have aged, and I've been informed by local residents there were difficulties in the original designs. For example, there was no water upstairs. This has been added more recently. Life moves on, and housing standards have improved. Some dwellings are being refurbished, and some are being completely replaced. I note that Waverley is committed to upgrading its housing stock. Quite right too, we need decent homes for residents. As the officer has outlined, Site A's redevelopment will provide 37 new homes to replace 22 existing homes. And I'm assured by officers these new homes will be quality homes built to the highest standard commensurate with value for money. And I do have to emphasise all will be for social rent. Waverley has held consultations with local residents, and documents have been available to members of the views of the local community, residents and councillors, and their views have been taken account of. 2 show homes have already been built and occupied. More are being built at the moment on Site D of the previous plan. Thank you, Site D. And Site A is now the site we're looking at. I understand that work on this Site A is planned to start next year. In the words of one older resident, I wish I had a house like this when I was bringing up my children. I also note that all the room sizes exceed the technical housing space standards identified on page 34 of the agenda. I do support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Cockburn.
Thank you. Yes, as Councillor Bolson's just said, you know, we're living in very different times, and when the original houses were built, land was nothing like as rare, but materials were, and things were built very differently. And I just think this is superb, as long as we build to a high standard. And I think this is something that certainly the Housing ONS group would always stress, that whatever we do when we're doing replacement homes like this, that we don't cut corners. Apart from anything else, it's a false economy, because if you put in cheap fittings, you've only got to repair them very, very quickly. So I know life's all about balancing, but I think looking at the development, the slide that you had of the different finishes, and also the perspective slide, you know, it really does look as though these houses are going to be very attractive, lovely place to live. Landscaping, I'm so pleased you've as soon as I hear the words close boarded fence, you know, I start bristling a bit like a dog. But then you did mention hedging and softening landscape, and I think this is so important. You know, if you live in a poor area, I don't mean poor, if you live in an area that doesn't look as nice as it should, then, you know, your quality of life is damaged. There's no question. It's much nicer to live in a green area with hedging and some landscaping than in a very brown area where, you know, it's just close boarded fencing and tarmac. So I think the finishes are good. The way you're alternating with the finishes for the parking and for the pavements. And I think, you know, what I want at the end of this is to go and visit it and be really proud. I want to sort of walk along and think, gosh, you know, we gave permission for that. And I think if we can do that every time we do a development like that, you know, we can all sleep very well in our beds and feel that it was a job well done. I think this looks excellent, and I hope it, in the flesh, will look as good as it looks on that particular proposed illustrative drawing. I know the first one was outlined, but didn't that look clunky? And this looks just so much nicer. I'm sure it would be a lovely place for people to live. I hope so.
Councillor Forrester.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very short and sweet. I think this is fabulous. It's a no-brainer, and it's more of what we need, and it's in the right location, and I fully support it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think looking down on us, the Denningbergs would also echo that comment. Councillor Gray, did I see you indicate? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points. First of all, let me compliment the officers on the paper. I thought it was extremely good, and something we have commented on, which was the 3D representation, and I hope that becomes a standard for everyone who submit applications in future. It's nice to see that we're doing this on one that we have a connection with. I just pick up on the question of totally allocating parking spaces. Can the officers confirm there will in fact be visitor spaces there? I was particularly pleased to see that we haven't over-provided one-bedroom properties on here, that we've actually reflected what demand was, and we've gone below the recommended level, and I hope that officers will actually support similar applications when they come in from other parties. I'm a bit disappointed about the electrical charging. I noticed that there was a feeling that people wouldn't have a demand for electric cars here, but this is going to be a site for a number of years, and nobody really knows the way that electric vehicles are going, except that they're going to be encouraged. So I am disappointed that we have allowed that to happen, and that the applicant has chosen to accept that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say very briefly, thank the officers for the site visit the other day, and I completely and fully support this application, and quite frankly, the sooner we get building, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I too will be brief. I completely support my colleagues here who are supporting the application. Just one point. I think initially, when this scheme was mooted, there was concern amongst the residents in the area, but with consultation, communication from the officers at Waverley, that has all dissipated, and it has, I believe, the total support of residents locally, and I very much welcome this development. Thank you.
Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. Just supporting my colleague Councillor Gray on the electric charging points. There has been some comment in the press that in about 15 or 20 years' time, every single car will be an electric car, and every single resident will be charging their electric car during night time. So the pressure on the grid is going to be enormous. By having street parking points, electric charging points, you can alternate when various charging points are usable and when they're not. And I think most people are going for that. And so I would support this electric charging point thing being put in as a condition.
Thank you for that. Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, I enjoyed the site visit and previous visits. It really is, or has been in the past, and still potentially is, a very, very attractive estate. I remember after the war hearing about new homes and mixed homes, council houses and privately owned houses being built close to me. I enjoy climbing over all the bricks, etc. I'm sure the kids are not nowadays are not allowed to access these sites in quite the same way. But the main point is that it was said, and I didn't have any way of judging that myself, but it said that the council houses were actually built to a more substantial standard, although they looked identical, more substantial standard than the private dwellings. I don't know how true that is, but I think it was with regard to internal walls, etc., which were much better. I haven't looked at the design of this. With regard to Councillor Coburn's comment about soft hedging, etc., I fully support that. But looking around the site, there were a number of properties where the hedging was totally out of control. People weren't looking after it. How do we, and we hope the housing team are able to encourage the residents to maintain the facilities that they have, the soft hedging and other things, to a standard which is reasonable and acceptable to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chair. I took a drive up there today for the first time to have a look at this site. I was very impressed with the progress being made on the site. The one thought I had, I must pick up on this electrical point requirement. I'm looking at the parking spaces which are not near a lot of the houses, and the thought of council tenants running leads across their lawns and paths to charge their vehicles doesn't appeal to me very much. And I still feel that there, as was spoken earlier, in about 15 years' time, those cars will be quite affordable and they will start, excuse me, appearing in the council houses, parking spaces. And having toured other council estates, I noticed that the quality of vehicles parked outside most of the council houses are of a high standard. So the statement that they may not be able to afford it might not be one that I could consider. I would have to worry about the loose leads charging the vehicles in spaces that are not looking at the plan, not adjacent to the house anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a comment that my colleague here has made that on-street charging points would cause problems for the residents getting in and out of their own properties. So, you know, and someone else has also made the comment that you can charge a car from a normal 13-amp plug. Takes a little longer, but car companies selling you an electric car are only too happy to fit your house up for you.
May I respond?
Please do.
Well, that does answer the query in some way, but looking at the plan, they're going to have to run their leads across paths and lawns to get access to the vehicles. Some of the parking spaces are opposite the houses, across from paths and lawn areas, I would assume. And you've also got blocks of 4 alongside the house, which means they're going to have trailing leads. If they do have to charge their car from a 13-amp point in their own property, I can see there's going to be children falling over the things and causing a lot of problems. Thank you.
A good point, well made, sir. Thank you. Councillor Denis.
I think the point's actually been made. I had concerns about the vehicle charging, and some manufacturers are actually stopping petrol and diesel cars, so they'll all be electrical cars. I think it's about 2030, some of the announcements have been made for that day. So I agree, I think this is an excellent application. That's my only issue, is about the charging, and I do think it makes sense to change the condition and put it back on, but other than that, excellent.
Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally support this electrical points regarding it. And if there are leads running around, it will be a major issue for health and safety on the grounds. So if there's no point provided, could there be something on the garden which could be opened up and connected to it? So the leads do not go much, but I totally support the electrical points should be there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm not concerned about the issues of the electrical charging points, whatever. I think we can, the problems that we might have with this will be reflected right across the country if we've got to install charging points and uprate our generating system and delivery system across the country. So I'm not going to worry about that now. I'm more concerned, actually, Chairman, that issues with SUDs and I've also seen here flat roofs and planting issues where officers seem to be telling us that we could do better, certainly that it's not ideal. If I can refer you to page 30 for a start of the report. Refer myself to it. 330. It tells us halfway down that officers note that several of the proposed dwelling designs include flat roofing, and whilst that's not encouraged in traditional residential development, it would be towards the rear. There would be some views from vantage points, but it says it's considered these features would not be of a size and scale to result in material visual detrimental harm. I'm just wondering whether possibly there could be I think officers are telling it could be designed differently and better, or perhaps they're saying, no, this is the very best that we can do and we've got to have some flat roofs, even though we don't want them. And further down then we start talking about landscaping between the plots, which Councillor Carol Coburn had referred to, where it says the large expanse, this is the bottom 3 lines on page 30, says the large expanse of the rear of the site would not benefit from sufficient space between to allow for the planting of trees. And at the top of the next page, it says, whilst officers consider this element of the proposed layout to not be ideal, it's considered it wouldn't result in a level of material detrimental harm such to warrant a reason for refusal on this ground alone. Well, you know, no, this is a Regulation 3 application that it's us granting consent to ourselves. We're not going to hold this up for the sake of it not being the best design possible, but I wonder whether we could do better than you know, what we're being told here. Also says that it's considered, this is in the second paragraph, it's considered that there would be sufficient public landscape areas within the site to soften the appearance of such features. That was Carol's concern, the close board fencing. It says full details could be secured by means of a condition. I'm just wondering, I did look at the conditions, but I didn't check particularly whether we have got a condition that does guarantee that. So if you could answer that for me. But I'd like to move on. The space standards, these look like they're going to be a nice size, but if you'd also just confirm we don't have a space standard adopted here, so it's irrelevant. It's not something which we will, is a planning consideration for us any more than the fact that some are affordable. Although I don't know whether that's 80% of market rent affordable or at the current affordable rents. You might clarify that if it is relevant. Main issue, if I can refer you to the inside back page, which is page 61, informative 17, which tells us that ground investigations of an adjoining site suggest that infiltration sites are not going to be appropriate. Presumably it's very clayey. For this reason, the infiltration's been discounted for the site. The applicant is proposed to restrict flows, or we're proposing to restrict flows from the site to less than pre-development brownfield runoff rates, but we should be trying to meet greenfield runoff rates. That's what the local lead flood authority and the Environment Agency have always been telling us. It says they're not able to fully implement SUDs to limit flows to greenfield runoff rates. Attenuations being provided by means of oversized tank sewers for adoption by Thames Water. And I'm just wondering whether that's ideal and whether we can do better. We've also got somewhere in here, there was a response from Thames Water. You might be able to help me with what page that's on, because I'm getting lost here. It might be page 16. Page 16, Thames Water said in their latest comments, or later comments than back in February, the applicants will need to contact Thames Water with pre-development inquiry. If the applicant finds shared drainage, the sewers may need to be diverted, as Thames Water does not allow new builds over public sewers. I don't know why in the 7 months intervening we haven't gone any further into that, because then I think if we go to the back of the page, back of the papers again at informative 11, that says the applicant's attention is drawn to the comments provided by Thames Water, references made within the comments of the need to approach Thames Water for a pre-development inquiry. So I'm wondering why haven't we done that, and is this likely to be a problem? Because they're saying we might need to redesign it because of these things, and it looks like we haven't followed that up, and I'd like to know why, Chairman. So that's the main issue there, is in relation to the drainage, and you know, can we do better in terms of design? We've raised some, we've got papers in front of us say that this is us putting in front of us the best we can do, but it's not ideal and we've got a few problems with it. Do we sort of consent it as it is? I've also, and I'd like those answered first, we've got duplicated conditions and things which I'd also like to mention at some point before, if we're going to grant consent. Thank you, Chairman.
You mean you want to come back? Can you finish now, please, Councillor Hyman?
Sorry, absolutely. More than happy to. I just noticed that in the, if you look at condition 25 on page 56, bin storage should be provided in accordance with the drawing unless otherwise first agreed in writing. duplicates condition 1, which lists that plan number at, and that's on page 48, about the 9th line down or so, second line up from the bottom of the list of plans. We shouldn't be duplicating that necessarily. Amongst the SUDS conditions, where there are, I think it's sort of like conditions 5 to 8 or 9, there's quite a lot of them, and they all seem to duplicate little bits of each other. I know they're trying to control different elements. It looks like one controls looking after SUDS during the construction phase and another one at another stage, but we have got a lot of SUDS, and if you were to read through them all, and I doubt anybody else has bothered, you'll see they all seem to seeing as we're not even sticking to them anyway, they all seem to duplicate each other. We've also got, if you look at condition 14, when you get down to J, then all of a sudden that doesn't really fit into the rest of that condition. So that probably should be rewritten.
Councillor Hyman, can I make a basic observation? You could have raised all these comments with the officers prior to the meeting. We've had quite long enough to worry about what was going on.
Yes, some of this work, Chairman, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
Just getting back to the parking, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be wise to do it when they're building. It will be much cheaper than to retrofit it in later years. It will save the council money in the long run.
Councillor Coburn, you want to come back?
Yeah, I really must come back on that because we had this issue with an application in the Farnham area where they wanted to put the charging points in the public, in some increased parking for the recreation ground. And the reason we turned it down was not because we don't think that you should have that, but we just knew that residents of Badshot Lee would come and leave their cars there to be charged, where we had people who wanted to come and park there to use the recreation ground. Now, I know this isn't exactly the same position, but if you have publicly accessible charging points, you do run the risk that people will come along, plug their car in and sort of disappear. It won't necessarily be for the residents. So it's getting that balance. And I do understand what people are saying about health and safety and wires and everything else. But, you know, if we are going to get to the stage with these public charging points where we are going to create an issue of almost queuing cars, or certainly cars, you know, waiting to use these points who aren't necessarily residents of, in this particular case, of these homes. And so it is a balance. It's not that I'm anti-electric charging points, but I do worry when they are publicly accessible that, you know, we are creating another issue, another difficulty for the residents of these properties. So, as I say, it's a balance, I think.
Can I call on the officers to answer the questions on electric charging in particular and Councillor Hyman's comments?
Thank you,
Peter
Chairman.
Cleveland.
Yes, I think that the point regarding electrical charging points has been picked up by Councillor Coburn largely from what we were going to pick up on. I mean, it's down to members to decide whether they want to reinstate that condition. There's wording of a condition there. But our advice is to take the comments from the Environmental Health Officer alongside, I won't repeat the comments of Councillor Coburn about the management and using that in the public domain as well. So, but I would leave that to members to decide whether they feel we should reinstate the condition that was originally proposed, and that would be a way round of addressing some of the concerns raised. In terms of conditions, I worked through those points. Condition 25, we very often have an explicit condition requiring the provision of a bin storage, just to make clear that we want that provided in accordance with. It does repeat the condition number from condition 1, but the general approach is to ensure that's delivered. We're explicit in providing a detailed condition on that. In terms of the SUDS conditions, firstly, these are, whilst we apply the wording and ensure that they're compliant with tests, the SUDS conditions are those recommended by the lead local flood authority. They deal with the different stages of development, and there's of course overlap in their wording and how they're put forward and conditioned. But there is a requirement to deal with at each stage, because if you just had a condition saying full details of the SUD scheme to be provided, you don't get that interim period of how it's controlled throughout the stages of development, and that's important. And they follow through, and they will overlap in part with each other, but you would get a very unruly sort of condition if you try to cover it under one effectively. And in terms of what we're looking for in terms of the SUDs, this is a brownfield site. We're not looking at a greenfield site. The guidance around drainage and SUDs for when you're looking at brownfield sites is different to greenfield. We're looking for an improvement, which is what we're getting from this. We're getting an introduction of attenuation and a release to the storm drains, and that the improvement is resulting. If you're not able, if you're going to make that situation worse, that's when you would have a concern raised. But in this instance, again, Lead Local Flood Authority are happy with that proposal. And comment was also raised regarding an informative with regards to foul drainage and works around that. As far as I'm concerned with that element of it, that is carried out under a separate regulatory regime. So diversion of sewers under that is carried out between the landowner and the utility provider. We've got to be satisfied with what they put forward works. If ultimately there's a requirement under a different regime, they will deal with it under that, but that's not a matter that we need to consider tonight, other than being satisfied that the utility provider confirms there is capacity there. So hopefully that covers off the points. Oh, sorry, and there's one more, and thank you. And condition, there was a request about the landscaping scheme, and that's secured under condition 10 in your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holder first, Councillor Gray, and then Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman, allowing me to come back. Firstly, a question on condition number 21 on page 61. It said the following containers are required to each of the 33 houses. Well, there are 37 houses, but I noticed 4 are one-bedroom. So are the one-bedroom units not allowed to have containers outside their house? It seems a bit unfair. That's the first question. And the second point is in answering to Carol Coburn's. Sorry. Oh, I've just been pointed, showing the last page. And the second point is in relation to Carol Coburn's point about the other people not using, the residents not being able to use the charging points. I draw her attention to the Council's Environmental Health Officer comments on the update sheet. The end of the first paragraph, it says, the location of the development is unlikely to attract non-residents who wish to use charging points. Thank you, Tim.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I'd just like to repeat my earlier question, which said that all the parking places are going to be allocated. I raised a question about visitors' parking, so if the officers would be allowed time to respond to that, Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, sir. Peter Cleveland.
Thank you. Sorry for not picking up that point before. Our parking standards take into account requirements for visitor spaces, so that will account for people visiting individual properties, and that's included in the calculation. So whilst there's not dedicated visitor spaces, that's what our parking guidelines, that's why they're relatively high, because it accounts for that overall. Thank you, Chairman.
Could I just come back? What you're saying is there's no visitors parking space. All spaces are allocated. Just if you could confirm that.
That's correct. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
There's been such a large uptake of electric vehicles. In London, they installed in charging points in the electrical lampposts. So it would be unwise not to address this issue now. And control, I don't believe there will be a problem, because it's going to be the norm. You know, I've been in this industry for 46 years, and I know the development. I know how many beans make 5. And I can tell you, the company I work for, we've had to redesign all our industrial machines to comply. And it's been a huge undertaking. And if we don't move with the times, we'll rue the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if the officers could just make a comment on the technical requirement on public housing sizes, because Councillor Hyman suggested that these were not requirements.
Peter Cleveland.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, they're national guidelines. We haven't adopted them, but they are a sort of a standard to work to, and they are a material consideration in our view. And often we're advising members in various committees that we need to take account of them, but if there's a slight under-provision, we wouldn't be able to rely on just that alone to refuse an application. But it's a positive thing that they've met those standards in our view, and provides a good standard of amenity for future occupants. So hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.
And finally, Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for letting me come back. It's just an observation more than anything else. Peter Cleveland has already said, you know, this is a brownfield site. It has got an established infrastructure, and there are things in the conditions there that are going to allow us to improve upon them. I agree with Councillor Hyman on the point that, you know, we could get tied down on the parking issue with regards to the electric vehicles. I think that's an issue we need to be mindful of. But let's face it. In this chamber, we have debated, argued, moaned, fussed and fought for a long time over greenfield sites having been sabotaged. 7 market housing for every 3 affordable housing. Roughly, that's the ratio. Come on, in front of us here, we've got a brownfield site with an infrastructure already in situ. Waverley's here to stay. They are the landowner. We can hold them to account. And I would just urge us to look at it as common sense and what it is. Exactly what we need, affordable housing for local people to have a good, decent standard of life in an area which is outstandingly beautiful on a brownfield site. So purely an observation, but as I say, Waverley is here to stay. They are the landlord. It's 100% affordable. I welcome it. Come on, let's embrace it.
Let's move on. Just one thought before I move to the recommendation, and that is on the affordable, on the electric charging points. Your observation on that, please, officers. It seems to be a very strong feeling in the chamber.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, the update was to remove the condition, but it'd be down to members to take a view whether they propose adding that condition back in, effectively keep the same wording. So I'll put it back to yourself to take a view on that. Thank you.
Councillor Hunter, did you wish to propose that we put that condition back in?
I do.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Is that agreed, members?
No, that's what I voted. I think it's the wrong thing.
Do you want to take a vote on it?
We'll take a vote on it, yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Those in favour?
Those in favour of reinstating the electrical charging point condition, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Against?
1, 2, 3. Abstentions?
Abstentions?
Okay, 1, 2,
3. Thank you very much indeed. So we put the condition back in. Peter Cleveland.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as a sort of procedural point, because you've agreed to put that back in, we suggest the recommendation was as set out in the original agenda rather than the update sheet, which reordered the numbers. So we'd recommend that you'd consider that one.
Can I ask?
Thank you.
Councillor Hyman, do you want to come back with a new point?
Well, I just wanted a little clarification of what came from what Councillor Gray mentioned in respect of the parking provision on the site, in case that's something we need to ask officers. I don't think we're going to let anything hold up this, but in case it's something we want to be looked at. I know whenever I drive around there, I find on Franklin Road, where it goes around the corner as it comes into Oxford Ridge, it can be quite awkward because of parked vehicles on the roads. And obviously, I think the concern that's been put across here is that if there isn't any unallocated parking for visitors, or if there isn't parking specifically for visitors somewhere within the scheme, then this is going to make the problem worse around there. And I just wonder whether the local member can advise me whether that's is the sort of problem that I think it is from when I've been there. It may not be. I may have gone there at the wrong times of day or whatever. But whether we should be looking to create some additional parking. I think the point that Councillor Gray was trying to make, because obviously once we've said this is fine, it goes forward as it is. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Councillor Bolton, we'll move to the recommendation after this one, please.
At the moment, there is no allocated parking. The houses were built 80 years ago when people didn't have cars. So people park on the verge, on the streets, double park. It's really crowded after about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. It's almost impossible to drive through the estate. With allocated parking, the situation will improve. There'll be plenty of space. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. We move to the recommendation, I think. Members? The recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 28 and informatives 1 to 21 on pages 46 to 62, that permission be granted. Those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous.
Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Before we finish the meeting, members, having granted permission for that, can I go back to the agenda? I forgot item number 1. Minutes of the previous meeting held on 26th of July, laid on the table half an hour before the meeting. Is it your wish? Is it your wish I sign there was a true record of that meeting? Thank you very much indeed. That concludes our meeting. Thank you very much.